Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So, this week we're talking about conflict and how to manage conflict well. I know I am not the only one who struggles with conflict, just based on conversations I've had with many colleagues and certainly coaching clients and so many of us who work in healthcare. I mean, humans in general have different tolerances for conflict. And I think those of us who go into the helping professions, um, I think a common trait we can have is that we're more conflict averse. We'd rather sort of keep the peace. We are want to be seen as kind and peaceful and nice to other people. And many of us have been socialized to believe that if we are in conflict with others, that is not synonymous with being kind. Um, it's a real problem we have in society that I won't fully get into because I actually want this episode to be really like practical. Um, I basically want to give you one key concept that I use all the time that helps me just get some clarity about what's going on if I find myself in the middle of a conflict. Okay. Um, so, yeah, hopefully by the end of this episode, you'll really have something very concrete that then you can immediately apply to your life in areas where you are worried about being in conflict, where you recognize that you're in conflict with other people, you're disagreeing with people, whether it's patients or colleagues or partners or whoever. And this concept, I hope it will serve you to get some clarity so that you can address conflict with more calm and with more of your brain on. And I say this as someone who's like a recovering conflict avoider. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Enneagram. It's like a kind of personality thing. And I'm an Enneagram 9, apparently, which is like peacekeeper. And that sounds very like wonderful and noble, except really like the main premise is that you're willing to abandon yourself and your ideals and principles and needs and wants, especially in order to please and keep the peace with anyone else around you. It doesn't sound as good when you actually describe it completely. And I will say, I'm still recovering, I guess, from that mode. That was like a mode that served me like an approach to conflict, basically just being in that freeze or please mode of if it felt like someone was attacking me, to just like try and please my way out of it and actually avoid addressing it. And so that's still inside me and it still arises. But I'm much more at ease now. So, like, kind of just doing a bit of a before and after, which I find helpful. Like, I used to just really run away from conflict as fast as I could. Like I said, mostly at my own expense. I would, that would mean I'm saying yes to things when I really meant no. I would agree with people when I actually disagreed. Like I said, constantly abandoning myself to keep the peace. And unfortunately, the artificial peace that is created by basically lying to everyone, and especially to myself, only lasts so long before something has to give. And you'd only have to ask my husband because he has witnessed this pattern in our marriage many a time over the years. And he's still with me, and I love him so much for walking with me as I figure out my piece of it and he figures out his piece of it, honestly. Um, and then, so what happens, and I would say honestly, especially with him, because I have like a long-term relationship with him, where I can only lie so much before it becomes obvious that I actually something is bothering me or whatever. Then it's like an explosion, and I'm on the attack, and I'm flooded with emotion, and I'm defending my honor, and now I'm, defending everything that I've put up with all these years, and I'm pointing out everything that they're doing wrong. Sorry, husband. Basically, yes, I am aware that is a pattern that exists in our relationship. And it happens other places too. I find it's very rare that I'll actually literally explode at a patient, though that did happen. And I cried in front of them. I was so angry because that's what happens when I get angry because I'm so afraid of conflict, then I will just cry. Oh, and I hold myself with tenderness about that one. And that was just because I built up my it's fine to such a level that it like something had to give. But most of the time I'm able to just like pave it over because it's on to the next patient and it's all different people, right? But over time, like I think what's happening to a lot of us is we like lose our connection with any of our patients then, right? Like you can't connect with people you feel like you're in constant conflict with. If you constantly view them as the enemy, you view them as a threat to your happiness, you cannot connect with them and actually have satisfying interactions with them. It also makes it really hard to like resolve if there's a conflict. So if someone's always coming in and they're like, you're not doing enough for me, you're not doing enough for me, and you're just trying to like dodge that instead of really addressing what's going on and saying, let's look at what you mean by that. In what ways are you feeling like your concern isn't being heard, or like whatever? If we don't just address it directly in a way that it doesn't have to be confrontational at all, right? We can wait until we get so built up. They're like, what do you mean you're not doing anything for you? Obviously, I do so much for you. You're not grateful for my care, right? Like it usually doesn't get to that point. It just gets to that point in our brain. But we don't have to wait for it to get to that point, the burying it until it explodes. Instead, there's this third option. And that's the concept I'm wanting to talk you through today and illustrate for you. And it really is the main method I use to keep my cool and stay connected when disagreeing with anyone, whether it's a patient, a colleague, my husband, my family, like whoever it is. And like I said, it's not perfect. I'm still my messy self. I still have all of those survival emotions arise in me when, they say a certain thing and it triggers me. Like it's all still happening. But when the dust clears, whether it's in a conversation or after a conversation, and I've often learned if I know it's going to be heated, to do this work with myself before such a conversation to get my view on it clearer, it helps so much. So this is the name of the method as well as the method itself. Put the problem in the middle of you. The problem is in the middle between you. You are not the problem, and neither are they. The problem exists between you. You see how I said the same thing 3 different ways? I really want to make that a clear idea. Because when someone else disagrees with us, our brains often have been conditioned to view that as an immediate attack. Even if all they're offering is a different perspective, they're just offering their point of view, we can view it as disagreement and take it personally. This is a very normal human thing to do. Like I said, I do it all the time, and I know I'm not alone in doing that. But it makes the whole conversation a volley of one person defending themselves and the other person viewing it as attack and then defending themselves back and forth and back and forth. It can sound like this. It's like, Doc, I feel like no one's doing anything for me. I receive that as an attack of can you just tell me why you don't think I'm not doing enough for you? Well, it's just that I'm not actually getting my pain needs met. I'm still in so much pain. So what about all the things I asked you to try that you haven't tried? Do you see how it just, and I don't know if I've ever had a conversation that feels very confrontational, what I just did. I'm sure it exists. People have those sorts of volleys back and forth, but really underneath, the patient's like, my needs aren't met. My needs aren't met. And you as a clinician are like, my needs aren't met. I need to have like, and you understand that I am doing work for you over here, right? And so we're just defending back and forth, and it feels like attacking back and forth. There's a saying, defense is the first act of war. Byron Katie, I think, said it. And it's so true when we get our defenses up. And so this strategy of putting the problem in the middle of you is a way to separate yourself from viewing things as an attack and instead view them as this third thing separate from both of you that you can both look at together. If you ever have seen the logo of my podcast, the Other Human in the Room podcast, this thing that's being created between the two of us, that's our finding our solution to this problem of helping this patient with their care, I find this works both on the small scale and the large scale. So I have 2 examples of how I have applied this just to my brain and then to my work. And the first one is actually larger scale, thinking about the problems we have in healthcare these days. And then the second one is an individual problem with a patient. So this first one, the first time I really thought of the idea and said to myself, put the problem in the middle, was actually inspired by this ongoing struggle that's going on, which is the conversations that are had connecting primary care access to overloaded emergency rooms. I don't know where all of you practice medicine in your lives, and I don't know if it's the same, but certainly where I live in Canada, in Ontario, there's no room in the emergency rooms. It's a major problem. And often one of the solutions that gets posited is if primary care sees more patients, this will help the emergency rooms, right? And so Someone in the Emerge says primary care needs to see more of these patients. And then, like I said, primary care as an entity, the humans that practice primary care, often they can say, we are seeing so many, we are overflowing ourselves. You're accusing us of not doing enough, and we're doing way too much as it is. It's not our fault, it's your fault, and then everyone starts pointing fingers back and forth, back and forth. So putting the problem in the middle would look like this. So the emergency room is expressing a need to have non-urgent acuity patients stop coming to Emerge. That's fair, right? I think we can all agree in an ideal world, only people with emergencies would go to the emergency room. That would be really cool. It is what it's designed to do. Primary care, on the other side, is expressing that they are at capacity for how much care they can provide. There's a lot of challenges to primary care, a lot of different expectations that they're trying to juggle, not only of our patients ourselves, but also often different pieces of the healthcare system think, oh, primary care could handle this, handle that, right? So they're kind of juggling everything they've got going on over there. And then in the middle is like where these patients could go, right? One way I often think of it is it's a simple like supply and demand problem. There's simply, apparently, more patients requesting care that is non-emergent than there are places for them to go. I guess there's not enough family physicians and walk-in clinics and whatever else, and therefore people are going to Emerge. I'm not saying it's as simple as that, but that's like if there was a clear abundance of non-urgent care places that patients could go, I think certainly less of them would go to the emergency room, right? And so when we think of that, where we're putting the problem in the middle, and now say I'm at a table with someone from Emerge, how can each of us get creative and innovative to do some amount of the work, understanding none of us are actually at fault, and none of us are going to be able to figure it out without the brilliant brains of the other people who are also involved in the care. All the easy solutions have already been tried, right? This is clearly a complex problem that will require a multifaceted solution. And so when it gets diminished to this person isn't doing enough, that person isn't doing enough, it's never helpful, right? So here's the magic of this approach. You don't need anyone else to follow this method to have it make a big difference, certainly for yourself and your experience of the problem, and even for your ability to contribute to the solution to the problem. So in the example I just gave, it would be a really beautiful thing if all the different stakeholders in the healthcare system all thought this way. So none of the messaging we're giving to each other had this blame, finger pointing mentality, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be like, primary care just needs to step up and do more, which is sometimes literally what we hear. But I can't control what other people do. The only person I can control is myself. And I can still make a big difference of my ability to enjoy my job if I shift the problem back to the middle where it really belongs anyway. So I can hear everyone saying primary care needs to do more, and I can convert that for myself to, we have a supply and demand issue. There's a lot of need. And when I'm feeling like I have a little extra gas in the tank, I can think and ask myself, is there one thing I could do this week to address the needs of my patient in a new way that might help this demand issue, and take action on that? I'm not owning this whole problem. The stuff that I try with me and my patients may never actually address the issue with emergency room, because it could be that what I do with my patients has nothing to do with the emergency room issue. I'm actually not sure. But it is clear to me already that there's a demand problem. I know my patients say sometimes, I'm struggling to see you, I wish I could see you more. Or I hear people coming in for the same issue over and over, and they're not aware of the resources that could help them, right? And so when I put it in the middle and I don't make it a personal defense issue, then I can start thinking creatively of how could I help shift patient demand, offer patients different options that may help alleviate some of the possible factors, like just as little experiments, hypotheses that I follow through on, and see if that helps any piece of this get better in my little corner of this healthcare system. So examples, like I started doing online booking. That seemed like it would be easier for my patients and easier for the high demand on my front staff, who's another person who people, I should say there's more than one of them, who are really struggling with the deluge of demand versus supply problem. And so I tried that out. I happen to have a patient portal that gives patients a new way to reach out to me. So instead of having to come for an appointment for something that could be a quick text exchange, we can do it that way as well. I hosted a town hall over Zoom for my patients where I explained all the different ways they could access care, both with me personally, as well as reminding them I'm a part of a family health team and they actually have different people that they could be contacting for different part of their care. And I let them know about the emergency situation at that point and said, hey, just a reminder, emergency rooms are for emergencies. Here are all the other ways after hours. Go to a walk-in clinic if you need to. Like, here's the other ways that you can access care that may make the emergency room safer for everyone. Now, I say these examples not suggesting that anyone listening to this do any of them. It's fine if you never do any of them. And in fact, if you don't feel like you have the capacity to do any little experiments, you can stop at what I said was the first thing, which is at least acknowledging the problem isn't you. It is not all yours. It is in the middle of all of us. I find like that at least, then you're not so overburdened that you can't even address what's in front of you. But the thing I've noticed is once I've done that and I've created distance from it, instead of it isolating me and making me turn a blind eye, I now have capacity to consider ways that I could contribute. So yeah, and I think the more people that do this, perhaps we could actually find a way to solve some of these major problems. And even if not, I know I've made my experience of my job in healthcare way better because I only do experiments of things that I think will also make my life easier, by the way, if I didn't make that clear. And they could make my patient's life better. So maybe then they're a little happier, a little less complainy, also make my life better, right? So it's all about me in the end. I don't know if you know this, but that's all we ever do anything for anyway. So making things serve you, little experiments that serve you and may also serve your patients, could be a fun way to go. So that's sort of a macro example of how putting the problem in the middle takes the pressure off, right? A micro example could be just a conversation between you and a patient. So a classic example that's actually come up multiple times recently, both in my own practice with colleagues and coaching clients, is patients and controlled substances. And so the example I'm going to use is actually an old example of mine where a patient was on, daily, many doses a day opioid medications. And we did have an opioid contract that we were following. And they unfortunately had additional substances in their urine multiple times, as well as one time they did not have the substance in their urine they were supposed to. So it was like quite an obvious violation of the contract. And so I did my think about it and decided really the only course of action was to do a taper off of the medication. I followed guidelines, I called people, and so I made my decision. So the conflict wasn't internal anymore, because at the beginning the conflict was internal. Should I or shouldn't I? But they'll be mad at me. But blah, blah, blah. But I sorted through that and came to the decision, really, in order to practice safe care and to be in aligned with my values and what I think is best for this patient, honestly, but certainly best for my license and everything else. This was the decision I had to make. Well, that I chose to make, I should say. Words matter. So I cleaned up my side of the issue. So at first, what was in my head was fear of the patient complaining about me, being angry about it, doubting if it was the right decision. So I cleared all of that up. And underneath, really, the piece of it that was mine to own, was that it was always going to be my decision whether I kept prescribing or not, and how to go about stopping prescription. That was what was mine to own and own completely. No one was making me do it. This patient wasn't forcing me to do it because of their actions. I was making a conscious choice, and so that was mine to own. And then what was theirs, whether they owned it or not, but what was under their control I was aware of was, their desire to manage their pain, focus on medication being a solution for that pain, and a bunch of other things that honestly I wasn't privy to understanding, which was how the substances ended up in the urine, all the other stuff, right? Because at this point the patient was not sharing with me. They were denying that anything had been ingested. this whole thing, right? And so this makes it really tricky. Like we are aware that something has broken down. There isn't full transparency. And it's one of the troubles with things like opioid contracts that I honestly ethically still struggle with about the whole concept. But in the meantime, in this gray area of medicine, well, first of all, that goes in the middle of us, right? So when we think about what's the problem in the middle, one of the problems in the middle is our society's continuing grappling of like the opioid crisis and what's the right approach and what makes sense. Are opioid contracts useful or are they punitive? Like, honestly, it's still a big struggle, and I haven't fully made up my mind yet, right? Also in the middle between us, that's neither of our faults, but that we're both grappling with, is that pain is so complex. It's so hard to treat because we know it is mental, emotional, physical, and all of those feed off of each other, right? And that we don't have drugs that work without consequence for the majority of people, right? Some of the drugs that really do calm the pain nerves best end up having this backfiring effect of, not in everyone, but in some people, having overuse develop and then sensitization to it, and like everything, tolerance to it, all the things that can happen. And all of that layered onto sort of society's stigma of using these opioids, and therefore often an internalized stigma in a lot of us of, oh, if I prescribe opioids to anyone, that makes me a drug dealer. I feel guilty or bad about it. Like all this stuff that happens, right? So all of that is in the middle of us. That is not for me to own, nor is it fair to put it on the patient, right? At the end of the day, the bit of this for me to decide, that is my choice, is whether or not I'm going to prescribe this medication to this person. Over there, beyond the problem that exists between us, my patient's going to have their own concerns about it. So I don't have to be trying to solve the opioid crisis in this one encounter. I also don't have to be trying to manage my patient's feelings, change their minds, and to find better ways to address their pain or admit that they have an opioid use disorder, if that's in fact what they have. I can offer some of that with an open palm as a point of connection, saying, pain is hard to treat. I wish there were drugs that we could use that didn't have these side effects. I wish these drugs didn't also have addiction potential, so that our licenses sometimes get attached to whether or not we're prescribing them. I wish I had better answers here for you. But at this point, with the facts in front of me, this is the decision I've made, right? That's the kind of way I spoke to this patient, right? The problem exists between us. And I can acknowledge the way that my actions, they may be interpreting as impacting their life, right? And it is like, they can go find someone else to prescribe the medication, but it's going to cause at least a temporary hiccup for me to be doing this forced taper, right? And so I witnessed this particular patient, it was many years ago, literally kind of go through the stages of grief with me, in like, bargaining and denying, and then angry with me, and then sadness. It was amazing. I actually named in the room, wow, I see you like going through the stages of grief right here, and I hear you. This is hard. And I am following through with this plan. One of the things that I did name is, especially my belief in this situation at that time, is like, I don't think I can continue to prescribe this to you according to what the guidelines say I need to do. So in order to really make sure that I am on the right side of keeping my license so that I can keep practicing medicine for you and for the rest of my patients, I really need to take that action. Again, it's a way of externalizing what is true, right? I can own the part of my decision that's mine, and also say, I'm deciding to do this for more than just me. Whether they want to hear that or not, that certainly helped me make the decision cleaner that day. So those are two examples. There's a million more examples. And I actually would love if you shared with me an example of a kind of conflict you have coming up with patients, and you want to say, I don't know how I apply this concept to it. So like, you can always email me, hello@joanchanmd.com is my email address, or go to @joanchanmd on all the social medias and send me a DM there. I would love to hear what conflict situations you have coming up. I just hope that this will be this frame you can use, because it's a reminder. It's about letting go of what isn't mine and showing up the way I want to show up for myself and for others, No need to defend my goodness if I believe it completely myself. And recognize that the problem really exists outside of myself as well as outside of that one patient. So we aren't in this like battle to the death. There's this hard thing that exists between us. Okay, so in terms of what situations you find yourself getting into conflict for, I would just invite you now to really consider, what if the problem is neither you nor the other person, but actually exists between you? What would that look like for you? It is easier to do before or after actual conversations, especially if it's someone you can get quite heated with, to separate this out, right? And it's also easier to do with a third party. One final shout out to my husband in this podcast about conflict, but if I'm struggling with my thoughts about someone else in possible conflict or real conflict, talking through the situation with him and having him think, have you considered this? Have you considered that? It often helps me to locate where the problem is outside of the two of us. And that is so helpful. In terms of like how you can do this visually, do this. So take a piece of paper and draw 2 vertical lines on it to separate it into 3 parts. And on the left side, write mine, and on the right side, write theirs, and in the middle, write problem. Okay? Because that's always where it exists. There doesn't have to be a problem with you or them. The problem is between you. And I'm recording this both as audio and video because I do like to post these on YouTube. And so I just want to share, actually, I draw this exact thing. I'll try and describe it for audio people. It's on my whiteboard, and I have my 2 stick figures. And so one stick figure on the left is me and all my thoughts, feelings, actions, and outcomes. And then on the other side, the stick figure has their thoughts, feelings, actions, outcomes, and that's my patient or my colleague or my friend or whoever it is that I think I'm in conflict with. And then there's circles around this both, which just indicate each of our locus of control, what we're able to control. And then in between, I've listed some other common things that really are what often create the problem. So one of them is our patient's body. Sometimes it's our bodies, but in the case of who I was coaching, it's the patient's body. So the fact that the patient's body has a chronic pain at all, that's neither my nor the patient's direct control. It's just happening. And that is the problem that we're working on together. So some patients really own that as their problem as well and try and do a lot to address their pain. They might get pain coaching, they might do physio, and some patients don't, and that's theirs to contribute or not. And then over on the other side, we get to decide how much we contribute as well, right? And then the other things I put in the middle here, the system, like the healthcare system, society. I honestly don't know if those doing by video can even read what I wrote because it's pretty chicken scratch. But I draw that all the time, and I encourage you to do that. Okay, I'm swirling. I feel like this person hates me and I hate them, and what's going on? Separate yourselves out on a piece of paper. It's such a relief to our brain to know we're actually separate from the person we're in conflict with, and because it feels very internalized. And then put the problem in the middle, because that's always where it lies. And so, like I just illustrated with that whiteboard, I obviously do a lot of this type of coaching and problem solving and conflict strategy, you could say, with my coaching clients. And so if you've been curious about coaching with me, you can always go to joanchanmd.com/course, which is my introductory coaching course. It's an email course where you learn some of my key coaching concepts that I teach to my clients. And then you can also learn how we can work together. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that this allows you to approach conflict with more confidence, with the idea being, what if neither of you have to be the problem, but the problem exists between you? I hope everyone has an amazing week, and I'll see you next week.